Midnight on Earth podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan. Hey everybody, we are back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm your host, Jake Weaver, and we are here to bring you more knowledge, more light, and more love, and more incredible authors with incredible output, like Tobias Churton. Tobias Churton is here, and he's going to be talking about his latest book, The Books of Enoch Revealed, The Wicked Watchers, Metatron, and the Fruits of Forbidden Knowledge. Absolutely riveting book, especially if you love any type of biblical history or ancient mysticism. Absolutely captivating. We're going to talk to him in just a second. But first, I need you to do something for me. Follow me on Instagram at midnight_on_earth. That is the address. You can follow me there. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you go to get your podcasts, click that button that connects us so you know when these incredible people come on. You get that notification. And most importantly, of course, word of mouth, frequency, real human connection. Tell a friend, midnightonearth.com. Well, we are just about to talk to Mr. Churton, but I want to read his bio for you. So here we go. Tobias Churton is Britain's leading scholar of Western esotericism, a world authority on Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and Rosicrucianism. He is a filmmaker and the founding editor of the magazine Freemasonry Today, an honorary fellow of Exeter University, where he is faculty lecturer in Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. He holds a master's degree in theology from Brasenose College, Oxford, and created the award-winning documentary series and accompanying book, The Gnostics, as well as several other films on Christian doctrine, mysticism, and magical folklore. All the things we love here. The author of many books, incredible books, actually, including Gnostic Philosophy, The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians, and Aleister Crowley, The Beast in Berlin. He currently lives in England, and he's here with us today. Hello, Tobias.
Hello, Jake. Good to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I feel very honored to have you here.
Quite right.
And isn't it miraculous through technology that you are in England and I am in Portland, Oregon, and here we are at the speed of light talking almost as if we are in the same room?
Yeah, it is. It's something that in my childhood I only saw on the TV series Thunderbirds, and I thought, that will never happen.
But isn't it interesting that those ideas get implanted in the collective unconscious, and then that visual representation somehow creates a thought form which leads to its eventual manifestation? Very strange. We've seen it over and over.
Yeah, it's the problem is that it works both ways, doesn't it? We can imagine these wonderful things which impel us in process of time to create something like them. We'd never have got to the moon if somebody hadn't dreamt the impossible dream of going. But of course, a lot of the time, people are projecting bad dreams. And I think it's easier to generate a bad dream than a good one.
Isn't that interesting? How the flow of energy seems to amplify the inspiration that holds people in a state of oppression. Gnostics would say it's because of the demiurge, that we are in some realm ruled by an imperfect God. What are your thoughts on that? Is that real?
Well, I think the demiurge to me is we can't say that the original Gnostics who took the Platonic idea that the universe was created by a craftsman, not by any ultimate power, but using a derived intelligence, a derivative intelligence. And the radical Gnostics said, use this as a stick to beat the God of the law of the Hebrew scripture, and say, well, this was an inadequate conception of God. Now, they may have believed it quite literally, but I do think the idea of the demiurge as a hostile agent can be understood by us today as representing the ego of the universe.
Yes.
The big I am. Look how big I am. I'm, enormous in scale, inconceivable, and therefore you are somehow imprisoned by the physical facts of our existence. And I think the useful part of the Gnostic mythology to me is that they said that we can break out of this artificial self. So the universe, in that sense, mirrors the problem of the egotist, the person who is overwhelmed by their ego, whose sense is a false self, who's aware of a false self, which many people call the great, the big I am, if you like, right, and never get through to the spiritual self. Or what's even more worrying is when people confuse the two, and then you get the big God I am, and that's one way to get on in politics these days.
Or get yourself locked up into an institution. It really just depends on how much money you have, right?
You can get locked up into the White House.
Exactly. Or any of these actual places around the world, because corruption is a human experience. Unfortunately, it's a lower bandwidth of behavior, but sure, we have the potential to evolve out of it. This is the awakening of that Christ consciousness within that thing that Enoch was trying to activate as a proto-Christ. Tell me about Enoch. Let's just talk about Enoch. Who is he? What is his origins? Tell me about Enoch.
Well, we know the name Enoch from two characters in the book of Genesis. It's the second one, not the son of Cain, that we're interested in. He's seventh in line from Adam, according to the book of Genesis. And his write-up there as one of the antediluvian patriarchs is very brief. It said, for Enoch walked with God, and God took him. And that's what we learn about. He walked with God, meaning that he was totally acceptable to God. He was walking in ways that were acceptable to God. And God took him. And this line, and God took him, was taken to mean that he never died.
Right.
And that he never suffered death, which in late Judaism was associated as the result of sin. That's why people died. He obviously was regarded as somebody who was righteous and acceptable, and he's taken out of this world. Now, that's pretty much what we learn about Enoch from Book of Genesis. Now, a series of writings started to appear, certainly by around 200 BCE, if you prefer, where Enoch is the star turn. And the first collection of these that we know as a collection is generally called First Enoch or the Book of Enoch. And in this text, parts of which have been discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran,
right,
in Jordan, when it was part of Jordan at the time of the discovery in 1946-47. And we learn there that a lot more about him. He becomes an apocalyptic hero who is sent from heaven to warn humanity of a coming judgment. But it's not so much humanity he's warning as the result of kind of invasion of Earth by wicked angels called the Watchers.
Right.
Watchers is just really another word for celestial beings who are watching. Hold your horses if you're chariot of the gods-minded kind of person. But anyway, these wicked angels, presumably not having enough to do in heaven, gaze down at earth, and they are utterly transfixed by the erotic attraction that they can't control for human women.
Sometimes I have to say, Tobias, sometimes I can understand that, because as a human male, the human female is absolutely the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So perhaps it's one of the most beautiful things.
Well, then you can really imagine what it would have been like for these sons of God. And we never hear about the daughters of God, of course.
Of course.
In the heavenly court in the first book of Enoch, they're the sons of God.
Right.
And so they've been sons of God with no sisters, no mothers, no female whatsoever. So the implication is they haven't even seen female life before, because according to Genesis, Eve is only, taken out of Adam's rib.
Right.
And as a companion. Well, the angels apparently don't need companions because they're never lonely up there. But then they discover that the human beings have got something they haven't. And you have this story of them descending, this group behind a character, two leaders. One's called Azazel and the other is Shemhaza. And they make a pact on Mount Hermon, which is, of course, still there today. Beautiful, beautiful mountain on the Israeli-Lebanese border, and sadly now covered with defensive and offensive positions of sinful humanity and a different kind of watcher altogether. But in the Book of Enoch, we think around 200 BCE, they descend on Mount Hermon, make a pact, and then they descend upon the women of the earth. And such is their lust that they produce offspring who are giants, thousands of feet tall. And these hideous giants, which are the miscegenation of a spiritual being mating with a human being, are truly monstrous and start killing, eating, maiming, destroying humanity. Meanwhile, the angels teach humanity all the arts and all the arts of suspect value to an innocent person. They teach them about enchantments, chemistry, breastplates, sophisticated warfare, how to deceive in looks or attitudes. And basically, it says in the Book of Enoch, to him, Azazel, ascribe all sin. All sin comes from this descent from heaven. Well, this gives us an idea of some of the reasons why the Book of Enoch had trouble being accepted in some circles.
Right.
When the Jews produced a canon of Jewish rabbis produced a canon in about AD 90. They didn't want this book, even though it was quite revered and is quoted in the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament. In fact, it's the only prophecy quoted in the entire Bible that is not in the Bible. When Jesus quotes Jeremiah or Isaiah or Ezekiel or Zechariah or Joel or whatever it is, you can find those the sources of those quotations in what Christians call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scripture. But Jude, or in Greek, Judas, quite possibly Jesus' brother, quotes from the Book of the Watchers, which is this part of the Book of Enoch, about the descent of the judgment of God on sinful humanity. And it's quoted without any caveat or anything like that as scripture. It's quoted as scripture. And in the Ethiopian church today, the Tewahedo Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, Book of Enoch is part of the Bible.
Yes.
This is an Orthodox church where it sits happily and comfortably next to the Book of Job. In the Western Church, the Book of Enoch disappeared after the 6th century, and was unknown in its entirety until James Bruce, a Scottish explorer and bon vivant and writer and explorer, brought it back to Europe in early 1773, where it was untranslated It wasn't translated, in fact, until 1821.
Right. And there's very few. In fact, that was the only one for a while. I just want to back you up a little bit and just give our audience a little bit of context. So the Book of Enoch is a compilation of, I believe, 5 books, including, like you said, the Book of the Watchers. And that book, in one instance, was preserved because, like you said, the Ethiopian Coptic Church, they evolved, not many people know this, they evolved pretty much independently in Africa and had their own island of Christianity, which preserved even more books. Really, I believe it's like 36 books more than the traditional Old and New Testament canon. And that was started, so they say, with the help of apostles Mark and Philip. And then other apostles went and started the Catholic Church. So this other church was able to preserve this book that was eventually removed from the Bible because of its contradictions, like you said, its mysticism, extreme mysticism, and showing that there are still these beings here, these watchers, watching over us, perhaps having influence over us. What do you think about that? Who are the watchers, and are they still here?
Well, according to the Book of Enoch itself, the prayers of benighted humanity who was suffering under the tyranny of these giants and of the watchers themselves appealed to the appealed to the archangels. And God decides eventually to have them destroyed. The giants, particularly, he can destroy their bodies, but he can't destroy the angels. So he has the angels put into dungeons beneath the earth, waiting their eventual judgment. Whereas the fate of the watchers is more, the fate of the giants is more interesting. They're sometimes called the Nephilim.
Right.
And because they were part human, part angelic, they can't be destroyed because they have immortality, which comes from heaven. Hence, they are going to be cast into eternal fire. And that's where this idea that we've all heard of being burnt eternally in hell comes from. It wasn't an act of sadism on the part of the Creator,
right,
to condemn the wicked, which is what it was later applied to. The point was, how do you deal with an immortal soul that has got to be suppressed permanently because it's dangerous? And so what they came up with was an everlasting burning lake. So the souls, the immortal souls of these giants, have got to be put in such a place at the final judgment. But what Enoch also prophesies is that eventually the corruption that these wicked angels have wrought on earth will be, in the fullness of time, remedied in a final judgment. Now, then we get on to why we're able to date these documents, because in the dream visions, which involved several apocalyptic passages, he tells the story of Jewish history, much of which we're familiar with from the Old Testament. And he coming up to the time of the Greek dominance, the Greek and Egyptian dominance of Israel in the 4th century BC and the 3rd century BC. And then we're getting to the time when God's going to finally wrap all this up, judge mankind, and deposit the watchers in permanent incarceration, and cleanse the earth for a new heaven and a new earth. And all our ideas from the Book of Revelation, the fundamental ideas, are already there in the Book of Enoch. So there's every reason to think that the Christian apocalyptic scheme that we find in parts of the Bible, like Mark chapter 13, certainly the Book of Revelation, and the general apocalypticism of Christianity, is derived hugely from this Enochic tradition, deprived of the explicit message of the angels, the wicked angels. Instead, we have Satan as the kind of Azazel character.
Right.
But Satan develops in Judaism much later. The word Satan isn't a name. It's not a name of somebody. Hi, Satan. In Hebrew, ha-satan, it simply means the adversary. And we're talking like a prosecution counsel in the court of God. Right. So in the book of Job, he appears as a sort of accusing barrister, allowed by God. God says, look, I think Job is innocent, and if you can prove otherwise, then fair enough. So the Satan, as he's called, the Satan, conjures up a scenario where he thinks if he puts Job under enough torture and misery, that he will crack and he will curse God. And in the end of the book, God is vindicated. Job doesn't crack, though he is mystified as to why he suffers such an enormous suffering. And that old phrase, the patience of Job. Job had no patience at all, nor would anyone put through the misery he is. But so what I'm trying to say is that the itinerary of Enoch, the apocalyptic itinerary, becomes a satanic itinerary in the later development of Christian church, and everyone's heard of that. So we ascribe all sin to the temptations of Satan, as opposed to the Enochic picture.
Azazel. Yes, and it's absolutely amazing that this was a part of theology and that religion and those religious traditions for so long, and then it almost completely disappears. It's recovered, and in this digital age, we can literally jump on our computer and find every translation. There's not many, but every translation out there, you can have it delivered to your house in one day.
You can read the Book of Enoch. What you can't read is the vital scholarly studies that have been directed to it for the last 2,000 years, coming up to the present day, which are now of an extraordinarily high standard, and which will correct the kind of natural tendency of people to see this as yet another prediction of our times. It's not a prediction of our times. If people want to apply it to our times morally, that's up to them. But it is a description of the way people saw, Jews, particularly certain Jews, saw the direction of history in between the 2nd century BC and the time of Jesus, in the 1st century AD. So there was the absolute expectation that the universe would be cleansed of its sin, really, I suppose we'd say the 1st century, and that accounts for the excitement with which the Jesus movement was able to accrue, which it was able to accrue so quickly and so radically as to start what we recognize today as almost a new religion.
Right, which is rooted in
fact, all of that is Judaism. But in fact, it's Judaism.
Absolutely.
It's Middle Temple Judaism. And to hear today, of this whole anti-Semitic myth developed by various parties over the last 2,000 years is truly tragic. There isn't a shred of Jesus' teaching and the prophecies of that time which do not belong to middle or Second Temple Judaism.
Oh, absolutely.
Recognize it.
And then most people often forget right away, especially people that are kind of in a bandwidth of anti-Semitism, racism. Perhaps they have some religious foundation in their mind, but their guru, their person that they love so much, is actually as Jewish as you could possibly be. Jewish parents, full-blooded Jewish. It's really mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, Hitler would put him in Auschwitz.
Exactly. And not only that, he got
and the Darwish in Syria would behead him. So.
Exactly. And he got to teach in the temples, which not every Jewish person got to do. You actually had to have some sort of knowledge, some sort of...
I think he was a priest, personally. I think Jesus was actually a priest. In the ordinary sense of the word, I think his father was a priest. He comes from a priestly family. His whole education seems to be that, which I would imagine he was one of the poorer priests in the 1st century who were at odds with the richer priests, usually called Sadducees, the Sadducean party or Herodian party, who are in favor of the Herodian family. I think I do think a great deal of the tradition is correct. I strongly suspect that he was indeed of the line of David and all of that.
Absolutely. And studied in mystery schools as well. I mean, the Egyptian mystery schools when he was in Egypt during that time. I mean, supposedly where he lived was 12 miles from a Buddhist temple. There was so much esoteric knowledge floating around Egypt at that time. I'm sure he was absorbed in it.
Well, you'll know if you finished my book yet. There's a whole piece in there about things that I don't know anybody who ever knew about. I didn't know about it when I started the research, that there was a Jewish temple in Egypt that was modeled precisely
I did read that.
on the temple in Jerusalem, according to Josephus. And that wasn't actually destroyed by the Romans until about 73, 74 AD. So it was in existence from the time of the first Enochic writings. No, in fact, a little bit later. I think we would have been founded in around 174 BC, and it carries on as a complete Jewish temple in the Nile Delta, right up to beyond the death of Paul and the time of Josephus, the Jewish historian, and nobody writes about this place, and yet they found it's there today in Egypt. Tel Yehudie, the hill of the Jews, and the area is still named after the high priest who was ejected by the Greeks from Jerusalem, Onias III, although some say it was Onias IV, who establishes a different kind of priesthood in Egypt at that time. And they found graves which show that there was a lot of integration with the Hellenistic culture as well. It's phenomenal. The story of Jesus being taken to Egypt by his father, I speculate. I don't like speculation, but I think it's a reasonable speculation. There could only really probably have been two places he'd have been taken to. One would be the Alexandria, because there was a particularly sizable Jewish population in Alexandria in the late first century BC. Or I think to the vicinity of this temple, which would be even more interesting if one could ever show that this was where, should we say, an Enochically influenced priesthood.
Well, absolutely. And as you talk about in your book, there are these parallels. Enoch is almost the proto-Jesus with some of the things he talks about and some of the ways he puts his teachings out there. And perhaps either Jesus was part of the Enochian line as far as in an initiatory sense, or he was just influenced by the teachings and felt like he himself was carrying that frequency.
Fulfilling them, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like he was that. And truly, I believe that Jesus existed. How the stories, the mythology show up, I'm not sure, but I do believe that he was a person that tapped into the same level of information that we can all tap into with training and focus and really getting in resonance with our inner divinity.
Yeah, and he makes the teaching very clear that if you want to put this new wine,
can't put it in old wineskin. It's very clear.
No good. Yeah, you've got to clean up. You've got to clean up the paper. It's like if you want to write clearly, you've got to clean up. You're not going to. There's all these lovely little stories about the rich young man who visits him and says, "Look, I'm totally turned on by what you're saying, and I want to follow you." And Jesus says, "Bloody great, mate, absolutely terrific, delighted to hear you. I like you. Now, just before you do, just give all your money to the poor, and then we can go." And the guy's like, "What do you mean?" That's all I'm asking. You just give everything to the poor and you can have me 24 hours a day. You'll be able to hear that you think I'm so great. You can, that's the choice.
I know. Isn't that interesting?
And he goes away. Now, to me, that is a question for our times. That is almost the key. That is the key encounter of people from our generation who've been very thoroughly provided for on the material level.
Yes.
But we want it all, don't we? We want the comforts of earth and heaven in fullness, and we're prepared to turn our attention away from those who do not, because that's not me, So Yes, I think Jesus had all this esoteric knowledge, but I think he was also totally tuned into the reality and the physical and reality of his time.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of materialism, as you're saying, in the current third dimensional experience. However, we can evolve. We can integrate new information. Why we got lost in the Matrix? Perhaps it's part of our story. You talked about how the Watchers gave us this technology in various forms. Now that shows up in other ways with various cultures around the world where they talk about these figures that appear and teach them the aspects of civilization that allow them to make these great evolutionary leaps, when they have these cities and they have all this technology. So there's a little bit of parallel there in that. And is that a part of the human story, though? So the Watchers give us this technology. We're able to expand. We disconnect from source, but through the process of getting lost and finding ourselves, we reconnect with source and we become something even more than we've ever been before.
Yeah, there are many levels on which you can look at the story of the Book of the Watchers. But one thing is absolutely clear is there is a certain ambiguity about the status of the knowledge they bring. It cannot be denied. And you have this, by the way, in my previous book is about the history of the early alchemists and
Yes.
the true origin of alchemy and what they were actually doing and what they were not doing that people think they were doing. But one of the first great writers on alchemy is a man called Zosimus of Panopolis, which is in Upper Egypt. He was brought up quite near to where many of the great texts have been discovered, like the Nag Hammadi Library. Zosimus is grappling around 300 AD with the question of whether chemical knowledge, because we're really talking about metallurgical chemistry, was it? He believes it was brought with by these rebel angels. He's got that story from Enoch, that it was of illicit origin, i.e., should not have been passed on to human beings. But the point, he says, yes, it should not have been passed on to human beings, but because it originally derived from heaven, it must have intrinsically a good aspect to it. And it is only the abuse of this knowledge by wicked, the lustful, earthbound mentality of these fallen angels and those who follow them. It is their earthbound mentality which it disenables them from seeing that this knowledge has a positive aspect. And Zosimus then makes the case that if you operate your chemistry in a pure mentality and aim you keep away from demonic interference, and you don't think it's going to be magic. You don't make sacrifices, which were very common in those days, to magical or demonic entities, but you just say, this is science, it comes from God, we're going to use it well. I mean, he's like, to me, the first scientist in many ways, Zosimus, because he's talking about experimental purity.
Yes.
And purifying the mind. He's grappling with the Book of the Watchers in a similar way to the way you're implying. We have the knowledge. It is dangerous knowledge. It has a massively destructive possibility, but there is also, when it is viewed as a gift of heaven, it has a transformative potential, but it is damned hard to get to that. And of course, it's like putting a pistol in the hands of a child. Do you trust them? Innocence can be deadly.
It can. We've made it this far by the grace of the divine, however that shows
we
up.
Have, but a lot of people haven't,
It's all very strange. It's a strange planet. It's a strange dimension that we live in, that there's even these angelic energies, these things that we can tap into as a part of our kind of reality landscape. We're literally on this strange ball of materials held together by gravity and shielded from the sun in a certain way to keep us all alive. What is this place? It's super strange, right? But we get these little hints. We get glimpses into that reality throughout history from people like Enoch. Now, there are people that developed magic like John Dee around Enoch and around his book because it was out there and talked about in those early days. Can you tell us about that?
Are you on about John Dee?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I mean, he's born, if memory serves, around 1540, 1540s, I think. He dies in 1608, so he must have been born in the late 1530s. I just forget. I just want to put him in some context for listeners. So his golden era is during the reigns of Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth I, the great Gloriana, in whose time the first English settlement is made in, I think, Roanoke in
Virginia, yes.
Virginia. I think John Dee actually was given the rights to Canada at one point. I think on paper he was the Lord of Canada.
It's very strange.
Yes, I mean, obviously it hadn't all been mapped at that point, but the moment they got to the coast of these places, there was a tendency, like putting the flag in the moon, to claim it for somebody or other. Usually, in that case, I think Dee had first choice on Canada. I don't think he ever got to redeem this particular promise. But anyway, he was a polymath of enormous knowledge. He had the largest private library in England, which was sacked by the mob. People who probably read popular newspapers. What am I saying? Read. They sacked the library because they couldn't read, presumably. When he was he got to the limits of all knowledge of his time, and came to the belief that if he was going to know anything more about the cosmos, he ought to contact angels. Now, his knowledge was, the tradition had come forward that Enoch had intercourse with the angels. I don't mean sexual. That intellectual knowledge, and he was convinced that if he could learn the appropriate language and converse with super celestial beings, that he could extend his scientific and religious knowledge without limit. And his prayers exist to this day. You can read them.
Yes,
in manuscript, where he says, "As thou, God, enlightened holy Enoch, so please enlighten me, because I'm a humble seeker after truth, and I know you're the only place I can get it." You could say, unfortunately, he meets a curious character called Edward Kelly, who was later knighted in Bohemia for services to alchemy. Edward Kelly, all the pointers suggest that he duped Dee into suggesting he had the means to contact these archangels.
Interesting.
And proceeded to have a whole series of seances over a whole period of years in the 1580s, where they take down by dictation the alleged communications of these angels. And he developed a language which has later been called Enochian, because Kelly suggested that Dee would receive the lost Book of Enoch. Sounds a bit like Joseph Smith and the Mormons to me, but that if he played his cards right with the archangels and let John Dee's wife go to bed with Edward Kelly, because that was part of the deal.
I can't believe that. When I first heard that, I thought that was so strange. I was like, really? The angel?
Kelly is a weird con man. I mean, he really is. I mean, he's managed to con a lot of people in his life, even the most. And John Dee was immensely clever, but very clever people can be incredibly naive.
So they felt like Enoch had some sort of dialogue, which is why they called it Enochian. There was something angelic about Enoch. He, of course, was taken into those dimensions without having to physically die, so they say.
According to the mythological texts attributed to to fans of Enoch.
Exactly.
There are three main bodies of texts with Enoch. That's why it's called the Books of Enoch Revealed. We call First Enoch, which is pretty well the book that was brought back from Ethiopia. However, that book has a section in it which has not been found at Qumran in fragment. Doesn't mean it's not there, because we only got about 25% of what was originally lodged at Qumran.
Right.
But there was another text which is in First Enoch called Parables. And this is really the key one for Christian origins, because in the Book of Parables, which is thought to have been written around just before the end of the 1st century BC, or by about 20 AD, so Jesus' sort of manhood time. But the amazing thing about in the Book of Parables is two things. One is we receive the first and only descriptions of the Son of Man. Everyone who's attended church in anywhere, Christian church, will have heard about Jesus, the Son of Man. He uses this phrase, for the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. The fox has his lair, the birds have their nest, but the Son of Man, the Son of Man must be taken and he'll be killed, which upsets Peter. Most people think the Son of Man is just an alternative to Son of God, but it isn't. It's a specific title. And the only place we learn anything about this figure, the Son of Man, the only place, is in the Book of Parables in the First Enoch, where the Son of Man is the right hand being next to God. And at the end of the parables, Enoch becomes the Son of Man. Now, how's that?
Isn't that interesting? I was just going to ask you about that. He becomes Metatron, which is...
No, that Metatron is in Enoch 3, which is quite a bit later.
So this is the first transfiguration. This is him transforming into something else, being on the right hand of God before Metatron.
Becoming more than human. He becomes more than human. And he's even called Little Yahweh. Goodness me, Little Yahweh. Yahweh is the holy name of God, the unmentionable name. And now this is around the time of Jesus' manhood.
That's
maybe boyhood as well. No reason why it shouldn't be. And it's the only possible explanation we have for even though the usage of the word is different in the Gospels, there are parallels which you cannot ignore. And I think anyone really interested in the identity of Jesus really needs to read this stuff if they're serious about it. Do you remember the story about Jesus goes to what is written in the Gospels as Caesarea Philippi and asks his closest disciples, "Who do men say that I am?"
Yes.
And one of them says, well, some people say you're Elijah returned.
Right.
And of course, there are also rumors that he's the spirit of John the Baptist.
Right.
And then said, and others say another. One of the other prophets. Could one of these other prophets have been Enoch? Could he have been identified already at that point? Fascinating thing is Jesus never mentions Enoch. But if the Epistle of Jude is indeed by his brother, Enoch is part of the family world. It's part of their intellectual, spiritual universe.
Because it was part of Judaism at that time. It was not...
It is indeed. It is part of a wing of Judaism. As I say, you've got to remember, Jerusalem is divided between different factions, but chiefly between two sets of priests. But then you've got other factions like the armed zealots, so-called, or bandits, who are ready to, they want to pick up the sword, kill Romans, because they believe if they start a war against the Romans, God will come with his angels and assure them of absolute victory. Very much like your zealots in the Middle East today, who are under the delusion that God gets involved in wars in this sort of in this invisible manner, and their righteousness will vindicate them.
I think, at least in Judaism, God is pretty clear about the whole killing thing. Let's not kill each other. There's no killing like let's not do that. The thing is that Enoch, though, at first was this huge part of the religion and the teachings and even the mystical teachings, but then it was removed, almost lost, but definitely intentionally removed. Why do you think it was removed? What was the main reason? Is it because it unlocks some level of understanding for the average person that was too much to keep them in control? Was it just too contradictory with the other texts that they also wanted to use for control? What are your thoughts on that? Why was that hidden and lost?
It was a gradual leaving behind of Jewish, we can call it the original Jesus movement. The original Jesus movement is Jewish. It's Jewish, right. All that, until along comes their persecutor, Paul, Roman citizen, who has clearly a series of major insights, and he suddenly sees this is what the empire is waiting for. This could be he goes on this mission to the synagogues and to the Gentiles with an extraordinary belief, quite incredible, and gets involved with really quite violent debates with the people who liked Jesus but thought it was about Jews. And Paul is a Roman stooge now. How Jewish he was, he claims, that he's taught by the, he's more Jewish than the Jews. He knows his law, sort of thing that Herod actually used to say. Funnily enough, Herod the Great, he converted to Judaism and always claimed that he knew it better than anybody else and knew his prophets and all that. Paul makes makes extraordinary claims for his own brilliance. And he obviously was brilliant, because there wouldn't have been a Christian church without him. And that takes genius, no question about it. And anyone who's read his surviving epistles can see that this man was indefatigable, determined person. He recreates an entire religion based around a figure of Jesus that you never feel from reading his epistles that he actually knew, but he's a total contemporary. Not only that, he was not only involved with the murder and death of Jesus' first followers, and he's proud of it, by the way. He says he felt he was doing the right thing. He wasted the church, is his own words. He wasted it until he has this realization that somehow he's got to turn it around. Now, getting back to Enoch, what's happening is in the early church, the first church fathers all speak with approval of Enoch. It's spoken with approval in Tertullian, in Irenaeus, in Justin Martyr. And then in the 3rd century, you're starting to get doubts. Origen says, for example, he's a famous castrant. He cut his parts off. It's just worth knowing because, in case we think these were just ordinary people, they had some rather extreme ways of devoting themselves. But anyway, Origen says, well, if you believe Book of Enoch, he said there are churches that don't accept it. So by around 200, some churches were happy with the Book of Enoch, it's okay with them, and some were not. The real key developments are Athanasius, who's Bishop of Alexandria in the 360s. By the 360s, he will not include it in the canon. And I suspect there's similar reasons to why Augustine, nearly a century later, rejects Enoch. He said, I can't believe that angels can sin.
That is something I wanted to ask you about.
Exactly, and he looks at it like that. And the other argument, he says, how could this book from the antediluvian remote past possibly have survived because of the flood anyway? Well, right. That point had been raised 200 years earlier, and Tertullian said, well, perhaps Noah had it aboard the ark, maybe he memorized it, got somebody to write it down later. I mean, he did live hundreds of years, so he had plenty of time to sort of work it out. I mean, we don't have to take any of that too seriously. But there were debates about whether it was what we now call pseudepigrapha. Was it falsely ascribed? They always had the problem that it was in the Epistle of Jude. And Tertullian says, if God put it in the Epistle of Jude, I'm not going to argue with it. Okay. So for him, even if there were some rational reasons for doubting the authorship of Enoch, I mean, clearly it wasn't written by Enoch. I mean, if indeed a figure called Enoch ever existed, which is perfectly valid to say, the legends of Genesis are legends. There may be some bits of, and we know it was cobbled together from different sources.
Absolutely.
Two main sources in particular, we call a priestly source and a Yahwistic source. But whatever its provenance, we don't have to take Enoch as gospel. But obviously in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, when the church is being established, they have to argue that the books on which the religion is founded are 100% authoritative. You can't argue with the minds of classical Greeks and Romans if it can be shown that your text is corrupted or has been invented or is a apocryphal text. The word apocrypha, by the way, originally means a secret book in two senses. Either it's because it's about secret knowledge, like a Gnostic gospel, or it's real authorship. Real authorship is being kept secret. Well, you could argue that for quite a lot of biblical books anyway. I mean, we know that some of the epistles of Paul were not written by Paul.
Right.
Who was John who wrote the Revelation? It's not the same John of the John of the Gospels, and it's obvious that the John's Gospel wasn't written by any John who was walking with Jesus, that it may be connected, etc. So they did. Obviously, if you've learnt your theology in a Sunday school or in church circles, you'll be given the cleaned up version of all this. If you study it, as I had to at Oxford, as ancient literature, however inspired, of course. I mean, we wouldn't be arguing if I wasn't impressed by this material beyond other writing. Clearly, this material is special, but we shouldn't be naive enough to think that God spoke and somebody just wrote it down. Because we know from the early texts that people had to copy this stuff. They made mistakes.
Of course.
Things are added, things are taken away. And if you were objective, you'd say these are texts of uncertain provenance. We're not sure how they came about entirely. And a lot of our dating is sometimes, I think there are very good reasons for getting our dates the way they are, but we could be wrong about many, many aspects of the dating. We're doing our best. We're doing better than they were doing in the period of the Reformation, where they still thought the world was relatively young, and they had no notion at all about cosmic history that we know. And when they looked up at the skies, they saw nice glass spheres because that's what they were told they were looking at.
Humans. We have this story. It's always changing and it's always based on our perspectives. And I know that we could talk for a very long time, but I know our time is limited. So I want to ask you a couple specific questions. So as you said earlier, Enoch went through transformations, eventually leading to something called Metatron, which is really a person supposedly, or an entity that's recording everything that's happening with humans, the book of life, all of this information. It reminds me of the Akashic records, the Akashic records being this storehouse of all knowledge of the universe, and then Enoch being the conduit of writing it down and putting it in the book. What do you think about those comparisons? And then tell us how Enoch eventually gets to Metatron.
Oh, right. Well, first of all, Akashic record, that's something of Madame Blavatsky's creation. She's based it on all kinds of mythologies that certain events are written down eternally. Certain perhaps all the future is already pre-written. According to the Books of Enoch, everything that's ever going to happen has happened,
Right.
was already written down in heaven, and Enoch knew everything, and he had access to that total knowledge. According to the Books of Enoch, he's God's, how can I say, he's archivist, interpreter, and communicator. He's also sent to earth to give messages. He goes back to see his son Methuselah to tell him about the flood, and to reveal in books, writings that he must preserve, what's going to happen in the future, and the history, as I say, right up to the 1st century AD, when the whole thing is going to be wrapped up and the new heaven and the new earth is going to happen. And now the Metatron thing, we're not sure about the meaning of this Metatron, who is named. The name starts to appear in 5th and 6th century in Babylon in magical bowls. You get the name Metatron as a kind of spiritual being. But it's identified with Enoch primarily from a text discovered in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. But the text is dated, the actual copy is dated in the 1650s. And it's not called the Third Enoch or Book of Enoch. It's called, it's the Book of the Palaces, Hecalot. Now, this belongs to a class of Jewish mystical literature called the Hecalot texts, or Macabre mysticism. The Hecalot refer to the palaces of heaven, and the Macabre refers to the divine throne, which is also presented as a chariot with wheels. And the idea in certain aspects of Jewish mystical tradition, Kabbalah, received tradition, that's what it means, you could ascend in a kind of trance and profound meditation. You could follow Enoch. This is the point. Enoch becomes your passport to the stars and beyond. And you can then have visions of the Hecalots, the palaces or mansions of God. Remember the phrase of Jesus, in my Father's house many mansions. I think the word mansions is a bad translation. Let's say there are many environments or something, or spaces. We're not quite
Dimensions is what I always think.
Dimensions is nice, or dimension. Well, dimensions would put all these things in a kind of confusion of planes. But I get where you're sort of thinking like the Aries of Enochian
like
magic.
States of, yes.
Inner planes.
Exactly.
Consciousness or unconsciousness, possibly. But this Metatron character is in this text, which is dated, very broad dating, 200 to 800 AD. We can't get any clearer than that. It belongs to a class of literature which really is coming out of the Kabbalistic universe around 600, 700, 800, and is then enriched in the Middle Ages in works like the Zohar, the Book of Splendor, by Moses de Leon. And in that sense, if it's earlier, if we're talking 200 AD, then it's drawing on some of the mythology of Enoch, but it's not following the theology or the apocalyptic interest. It's really using Enoch as a nice name for your passport to the stars, as say, or beyond the stars in actual fact. Now, he's presented as Metatron. Now, what does Metatron mean? Now, in the Kabbalistic tradition, as interpreted by Robert Flood, who was next generation after John Dee, died in 1638, dies 30 years after Dee. Dr. Flood is associated with early symbolic Freemasonry for any number of reasons. But he believed that Metatron is the anima mundi, the spirit of the world. And by that, we're really close to the Greek notion of the logos, the word. Bad translation, the word, it's literal, but it doesn't give a sense of it. The word logos means, you got it at the start of the John's Gospel, in archeho logos in the beginning was the word. In the beginning was the logos. The logos is not a word, or even the concept of words. It is the mind of God, the intelligence of God suffusing everything and that makes it intelligible. So the universe is intelligible because it is sustained in its laws and in its extension by the Logos. Now, Isaac Newton was troubled to how did he explain gravity? He knew gravity existed. He came up with a formula for calculating its relation to the proximity of planets and its power on material things. But he could never actually answer the question, but what is gravity? Why does it exist at all? But he would take refuge in really a Floodian type answer. And he said, it is Christ that is holding all this together. These laws work because there is the Spirit of God sustaining the whole thing. Now, this is very close to what Flood understands Metatron to be. He's God's intelligence in all things. So you've got to understand, he's no longer, Metatron is not a human being, and yet he is. But he's what the human being Enoch has become. He has become a sustaining principle of everything that is, an intelligible avenue to understanding it. So if you get into some kind of relationship in your mental trance, if you like, in your spiritual rise with Metatron, you may get insight into different aspects of man and the universe. So that's what Metatron is.
Wow. So like a living frequency, like literally a living consciousness outside of time and space, a quantum consciousness, living light that you can interface with, and then you can create a dialogue with to download some of this information.
You too, there is the kind of implication you too could be a Metatron.
Well, I think we all are. I mean,
or you can share in this light. You can share in this light. But in order to do so, this is what you have all the whole business about righteousness and purification and putting earthly things aside. That has always been the difficulty. How do you lose the gravity of Earth? How do you become, we in our Saturn V rocket, Werner von Braun, the Nazi era.
Project Paperclip.
How does he penetrate? It's an act of violence. We send up a bleeding missile. Creates huge, for all I know, it's the origin of the bloody ozone hole, they keep puncturing it with it. I've always had a lot of time for the old hot air balloons, and I do believe that was something that could have been taken a lot further were it not for the R101 disaster and the Zeppelin,
Right.
But, a lot of ships have sunk, but they haven't given up sail. A lot of airplanes have crashed, but they haven't given up airplanes. And a lot of space rockets, including Tesla's the other week, blows up, but they don't stop. But for some reason, balloons are kind of, I think there's something very divine about filling something with hot air. It's something very gentle. But anyway, in our conception, in order to enter into outer space, we are doing it currently in a most violent manner, which of course suits some natures. Werner von Braun's example, and his spiritual followers. And didn't he use slaves when he was working for Adolf and his pals?
Absolutely. And somehow he was vindicated. I still don't understand that. I know it was part of Project Paperclip, where they brought over so many Nazi scientists just to have an edge on Russia, supposedly. But
I suppose they would argue, if I'd been President Truman, I'd have said, well, Mr. Churton, you've just said that this knowledge may come through evil hands, but we can use it for good purposes.
I know, it's terrible.
But we know perfectly well what purposes it was really being used for. The moon thing was a wonderful thing, but it was a psychological weapon of the Cold War.
Absolutely. But the point is
it was a way of defeating the USSR without boots on the ground. In my view, a very enlightened way of doing it. We should do more of this. You want to show you're a great country, do something truly great.
Exactly.
Like put a man on the moon.
No, exactly. And there's so many anomalies, but what I believe the point you were trying to make was that we can all become that Metatron. We can resonate with that and connect with it because it is, as Hermeticists would say, the all, in a sense. It is the thing that permeates all energy and matter.
Well, you've got to read the chapter in my book about Pico della Mirandola, because he seizes that very point in that almost the language you're using in the 1490s. And he's already recognized that Metatron is a type. He symbolizes human potential.
Absolutely. Yes, I did read that.
We shall rise up like earthly Mercuries. I was always conscious of one of the earliest space programs was the Mercury.
Right.
We shall rise up like earthly Mercuries to the embrace of our Blessed Mother. The Blessed Mother is the wisdom of God. That's what you're rising up to.
Well, I really do think that we are moving towards a new earth. So many different people, religions, new age people, spiritual people, they all talk about this new frequency that we're moving into, a more loving frequency, which would kind of align with the teachings of Enoch and also later the teachings of Jesus. But I do know that we're running out of time, but I have to ask you, all of this information, the secrets of Enoch, the things that were found to verify the books of Enoch, like the fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are so many mystical aspects of the Book of Enoch. What do you think the most important thing is about it? What do you think out of everything revealed is that biggest aspect?
Well, I think part of it is what we've just been talking about, which is the bearing it has on human potential.
Yes.
I think that's probably one of the biggest things we can take away and get a deeper understanding of that. Speaking for myself, I think it's the incredible light it spreads on Christian origins and on the development of religion, the religion of the Western world for the last 2,000 years, including Islam also respected Enoch. They call him Idris.
Right.
And I think trying to understand what has happened in religion and where we've gone wrong with that, I think that's very important aspect of it to me. But there's also there's the human potential idea, which is sort of inexhaustible, because this guy went all the way. You don't get higher than where Enoch is placed. And
I know, little Yahweh, like you were saying, little Yahweh.
Yeah. And it's too easy to talk about becoming God in sort of very simplistic terms. I'd say is, well, you come and see me when you've achieved that. I haven't met any little Yahwehs in my lifetime. But I've seen people who, including, I would say that people have a glimpse, and you can do a lot. It's like the what's a catalyst. You only need a little to start a different kind of life.
Yes.
A glimpse is a damn good way to start. But if I may quote Paul for all his faults, we are always seeing through a glass, and darkly. We never get the whole picture. Maybe you get a sudden shaft. Jacob Boehme, the mystic, talked about he was gazing at a pewter plate and he suddenly got insight into the universe. But if you read some of his writings, how many of them convey much to people today? Difficult to say. Everybody's insight sort of belongs to their own time, but there's always the essence of it, which is of all time. So I do think that the books of Enoch are going to stand as inspirational at some level for as long as they're human beings, unless we all become Metatron and don't need it anymore.
Well, I do believe we are going to evolve and we're going to love each other more when we just see that light. When we start with the light first, before we define each other in any other way, then we realize, my God, we're actually just one human family. And perhaps we can start treating each other that way collectively, that love, being truly in love with each other. That is part of that new earth frequency, that Metatron frequency that we were talking about.
Well, we're supposed to love others as we love ourselves.
Yes.
I think we've a lot to learn about how to love ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. But guess what? I truly believe that we are in a forward progression. There is a story, there is something that is unfolding for the humans, and it ends in a very positive place. It ends in a great place. Actually, and I don't even want to say it's ending, it reaches its next phase in a very positive place. We just have to shake off the darkness a little bit, you know?
You think that place is Oregon? Have I got to get on my camel?
Please
follow my star to Portland.
Yes, and bring 2 friends with you. What a fantastic conversation we've had, Tobias. I want to tell people where to find you. TobiasChurton.com. If you go there, the website, you can learn all about him, his books. The book we're talking about today, the Books of Enoch Revealed, The Wicked Watchers, Metatron, and the Fruits of Forbidden Knowledge, available everywhere that you can get books. And of course, he has an incredible library of books that he has already published, which I'm not going to read the whole list, but there's so many. The Gnostics, Occult Paris, Aleister Crowley, the biography, Freemasonry, the reality, which may come back into print. It's out of print now. He has incredible output. Definitely check out everything that he is about. And before we go, Tobias, is there anything else you would like to leave our audience with?
My very best wishes.
Very well then. Thank you so much for being here, Tobias. Incredible episode. Please hold through the outro music. And everyone listening around the world, get this book because it is the definitive book about the Books of Enoch. Of all the books that are out there focusing on everything that has been learned, studied, all the various fragments of knowledge, he collects all of that and puts that in this incredible book. There really is nothing else like it. So definitely go and get that. And again, check out the websites. Check out all of this because it's our time, people. Learn this, integrate this. You only can control yourself. So you have personal development. This is our goal if we really want those things that we're talking about. So we will see you next week, everyone. Midnight on Earth.